Theodore Marsh had worked the overnight shift at the Fairmont Chateau Laurier long enough to know which guests were sleeping and which ones weren't. It wasn't something they taught in hospitality training. It was something you learned from years of watching, from the way a light stayed on past 2 in the morning, from the sound of a cart being ordered at 11:45 and barely touched by midnight, from the particular silence that surrounded certain people, the kind of silence that wasn't restful but held. He'd been a night porter at the chateau for 11 years. Before that, a maintenance worker at a smaller hotel on Spark Street that had since been converted into condominiums. He was 53 years old, wore the same dark uniform every night, took the number 4 bus from his apartment in Vanier, and brought his own thermos of coffee because the staff room brew was, in his words to no one in particular, undrinkable. He was not a man people noticed. That was in most ways exactly how he preferred it. The woman had checked in on a Thursday evening in late October, when the city was cold and the canal had that pewter look it got before the first proper freeze. Her name on the reservation was A. Voss. She had one piece of luggage, a single hard-sided case, charcoal gray, and she carried it herself, which was unusual for this floor. She'd declined the bellhop twice, the second time with a firmness that wasn't rude but was final. Theodore had been passing through the lobby with the linen cart when she arrived. He hadn't meant to watch her, but something in the way she stood at the front desk, shoulders straight, eyes already reading the room behind her even as she signed, made him slow down without quite deciding to. He'd seen a lot of people move through this hotel. Politicians, executives, a few names he recognized from the financial pages his daughter sometimes left at his kitchen table. Most of them moved with an awareness of being watched. They performed their arrivals, this woman did not. She moved like someone who was always thinking 3 steps ahead and had stopped caring whether anyone noticed. She went up to the 8th floor. He watched the elevator numbers climb and then went back to work. He didn't think about her again until Friday night, when her dinner order came through at 10:20. Grilled salmon, no sides, a pot of tea, not coffee, and she'd added a note to the order, which guests rarely did, no knock, leave at the door. He was the one who brought it up. The corridor on the 8th floor was quiet, the carpet absorbing everything. He set the tray down carefully outside room 814 and was straightening up when he heard it, not loud, not alarmed, but distinct enough to stop him. A voice male low, not the television. Someone on the phone or someone in the room with her. He stood there for a second longer than he should have. By Sunday, and that's the only window, once she signs, there's nothing to contest. Then a pause. I know what she brought. That's why we moved the filing. Theodore walked back to the elevator and pressed the button and stood very still while he waited. He told himself it was nothing. Hotel guests had phone calls. Hotel guests had conversations he wasn't meant to hear. In 11 years, he'd overheard more than he'd ever wanted to. Arguments, confessions. One man crying so hard behind a door that Theodore had stopped and almost knocked, had stood there with his knuckles an inch from the wood before deciding it wasn't his place. He told himself it was nothing and he almost believed it, except for one thing. The reservation for room 814 was for one guest. He'd checked the manifest when he got back downstairs. He wasn't sure why. He wasn't someone who checked manifests. That was front desk work, not his. But he checked it, and the room was listed as single occupancy, and the arrival record showed one keycard issued. He stood at the desk for a moment, looking at the screen. Then he went to refill his thermos and didn't say anything to anyone. By Saturday afternoon, he knew something was wrong. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of small things, the kind of detail you only registered if you'd been watching long enough. The man he'd heard through the door. Theodore had seen him now, in the lobby, twice. Mid-40s, square-shouldered, expensive coat that was meant to look casual. He had the keycard for 814. Theodore had seen him use it at the elevator, slipping it from an inside pocket like he'd done it 100 times. But he wasn't listed on the reservation. And he wasn't A. Voss's husband, or at least not in any way that resembled comfort. Theodore had seen couples. He'd seen the small frictions of long marriages and the careful performance of newer ones. What he'd seen in the one moment the man and the woman had been in the lobby at the same time was something else. The man's hand on her elbow, steering, and her body making itself smaller without her face changing at all. The body knew things the face was trained to hide. Theodore had a daughter, Isabel, who was 31 and worked in family law. He'd learned more about coercion and pressure from her dinner table conversations than from anything else in his life. She'd told him once, during a case that had clearly gotten under her skin, that the most dangerous kind of control was the kind that left no marks, that looked from the outside like ordinary life. He thought about that on Saturday afternoon, standing in the service corridor with a cart full of fresh towels, listening to the sound of his own breathing. He didn't know what to do with what he knew. He wasn't sure he knew anything. He had a fragment of a phone call and an unreported keycard, and a woman whose shoulders were too straight, the way people's shoulders got when they were holding themselves together deliberately. He went home that night and ate dinner alone and watched the news and didn't sleep much. Sunday came in cold and clear, the kind of Ottawa morning that looked beautiful from inside a window and punished you the moment you stepped out. Theodore arrived for his shift at 6, which was early. He'd traded with a colleague without explaining why, and he spent the first hour doing rounds on the upper floors. She was in the breakfast room at 7:15. He almost walked past, but she was sitting at a table near the window with a cup of tea and nothing else, not eating, not looking at her phone, just watching the street below with the particular stillness of someone who was thinking very hard about something very specific. He brought the pastry cart over, which wasn't normally his job. "Good morning," he said. "Can I bring you anything from the kitchen?" She looked up. She had dark eyes, careful and tired in equal measure. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, though she wore it quietly, like most things. "Just the tea," she said. "Thank you." He nodded and started to move away. "You were here last night," she said, not accusatory, observing. He turned back. "I work the night shift most weeks." She looked at him for a moment, not suspicious but assessing, in the way he recognized from people who made a living reading rooms. "You brought my dinner up Thursday." "Friday," he said. "Yes." She held his gaze for just a second longer than was ordinary. Then she looked back out the window. He stood there for one more moment than was comfortable. Then he said, quietly and without preamble, "Is there someone staying in your room who isn't supposed to be there?" She went very still. It was not the stillness of someone offended. It was the stillness of someone who had been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to say out loud the thing they hadn't been able to say themselves. She didn't answer right away. She turned her teacup a quarter rotation on its saucer. "What makes you ask that?" she said. "I've been doing this a long time," he said. "I notice things." Another silence. Outside, a streetcar passed on Rideau, and they both heard it, and neither of them looked. "His name is Raymond," she said finally. "Raymond Stiles. He's my legal advisor." Theodore waited. "He's been my legal advisor for 14 years, she said, and something shifted in her voice, not breaking, but moving closer to an edge. "He has signing authority on 3 of my holding accounts. He knows every document, every partner, every outstanding agreement." She paused. "I found something 3 days ago. A filing timestamp that didn't match. A document I never authorized, executed under my signature, transferring controlling interest in my primary asset company to a numbered corporation I've never heard of." She looked down at her cup. "The corporation was registered 6 months ago. Raymond is the sole director." Theodore absorbed this. He was not a financial man. He had a savings account and a modest pension, and he understood enough about the world to understand what she had just described. "He's here with you now," he said. Not a question. He insisted on accompanying me to Ottawa, said there were contracts to finalize. I didn't have a reason to refuse. She almost smiled, though it didn't reach anywhere. "I didn't know yet. When did you find out?" "Thursday morning, before I flew in." She set down the cup. "I haven't told him I know. I haven't told anyone." Theodore looked at her steadily. "Are you in a position to contact someone independently? A lawyer he doesn't know. Someone outside your usual circle?" She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between surprise and a recognition she hadn't expected. "Yes," she said. "I have someone. She's in Calgary. We went to law school together. I haven't spoken to her in years." "He won't know about her," Theodore said. "No," she said. "He won't." "Then I'd suggest calling her before anything gets signed today," he said, and then stopped himself, because it wasn't his place and he knew it, and he'd already said more than was his role to say. But she was looking at him differently now, not the careful assessment from before, but something more open. The way a person's face changed when they realized they weren't as alone as they thought. "You could have said nothing," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" He thought about Isabel, and the case she'd described, and what she'd said about control that left no marks. He thought about 11 years of watching people move through this building, of knowing which silences were restful and which ones weren't. "Because I've seen what happens when no one says anything," he said, "and I prefer not to." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once slowly and reached for her phone. He left her to it. He didn't see her again until just after noon. He was in the service corridor on the 4th floor when he heard the elevator open, and something, 11 years of pattern recognition, made him step to the corner of the hall and wait. Raymond Stiles came off the elevator carrying his coat over one arm, moving with the particular pace of someone who had somewhere to be and believed the world would arrange itself accordingly. He passed within 6 feet of Theodore without registering him at all. Theodore watched him go. He noted the direction, toward the parking structure entrance at the end of the hall, and he noted the time, 12:14, and he went back to work. At 1:30, the front desk called the service line to let the afternoon team know that the guest in 814 had requested an early checkout and a car to the airport. Theodore happened to take the call. He was the one who carried her bag, just the one, still the charcoal gray case, down to the lobby. She was standing at the front desk in her coat, and she looked different than she had at breakfast. Not lighter exactly. That wasn't the right word. More like herself, collected in a way that came from the inside rather than being held together by effort. She saw him come through the lobby doors, and she said something brief to the woman at the desk and walked over. "She's filing an emergency injunction this afternoon," she said quietly. "My friend in Calgary. It should freeze the accounts before anything else can move." Theodore nodded. "I also called my bank directly," she said, "and my partner at the other holding company. Raymond doesn't know any of this yet." She paused. "He'll find out when he gets to wherever he's going." "Good," Theodore said, and then, because it seemed like the appropriate thing to say, "I hope it works out." She looked at him for a moment. "What's your name?" she said. "Theodore," he said. "Ted Audrey Voss," she said, and she offered her hand, and he shook it. A clean, straightforward handshake, the kind between two people who'd just been honest with each other. "Ted," she said, "I don't think you know what you did this morning." "I made a suggestion," he said. "You did the rest." She considered this. "I've had people work for me for 20 years, she said, who wouldn't have said a word, who'd have seen exactly what you saw and decided it wasn't their concern. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything." "That's a rare thing," she said. "In my experience, rarer than it should be." The car arrived. He held the lobby door and she walked through it, and he watched the car pull away onto Wellington. And then he went back inside and returned to the service corridor and finished the rest of his shift the same way he always did. Quietly, without drawing attention, doing the work that needed to be done. He took the number 4 bus home at 6:15. He made himself pasta and called Isabel and didn't mention any of it because there wasn't much to say. Really, he'd seen something. He'd said something. Whatever happened next was not his to carry. He slept better than he had in 3 days. There was a card waiting at the front desk for him the following Thursday, left with no return address. Inside was a single line, handwritten in a clean, unhurried script. The injunction held, "Thank you for not looking the other way. A.V." He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the breast pocket of his uniform and went about his shift. He was not a man who needed to be noticed, but sometimes, on the right night, in the right corridor, noticing someone else was the only thing that mattered.